Hello and welcome to Do You See What I See? Today we have a very special guest, a very prolific writer. He is a professor, he is a poet, he is a peace and social justice activist, Rafael Jesús González. Welcome, Rafael, to Do You See What I See?
Well, thank you so much, Yolanda. It's a pleasure to be virtually with you.
Well, it's a new way to keep company. Your life has been one of many talents, many gifts. I'm fascinated by your early days. You grew up in El Paso. You had a cross-border life. You had family in Chihuahua, where, by the way, my family is also from Chihuahua, Mexico. And I want you to talk about the impact on your life and your life's trajectory of those early days.
Wow. Well, as you said, I was born and raised right on the border, the El Paso Juárez area. So consequently, I grew up biculturally, bilingually, with family on both sides of the Rio Grande, the Rio Bravo. So a great influence in that was in my being bilingual and all my writing. My thinking has been bilingual. The early influences, of course, as with everybody, it was with my parents. And my entry to literature was through my parents. They would read to me from since I was a child, and they especially read to me poetry.
Really?
Yes, and they had me memorize poems, which I'm sure not complete. I could completely understand as a child, to be recited at family gatherings on Sundays at my grandparents' house, my maternal grandparents. So I grew up with language and with poetic language. Yeah, so that's.
Well, that's a fascinating. I think that is very es muy mexicano, as opposed to this side of the border when you're a young child. I think I could share a story with you, but that'll be another time. But I think that's very important when you learn, you recite, you share in the family setting. I've been in settings like that in Mexico, where they had 3 generations and they were sharing stories and songs and poems, whatever the age of the person that was there, the grandparent or the young child. It's a beautiful practice. And it's a way of transmitting values, virtues, which of course were part of our cultural upbringing. And the something in your education, I remember that you did some study in Mexico, and I have the feeling that your studies in Mexico opened you up in a different way, perhaps to the greater literature of the Mexican culture, the Spanish-speaking world. Am I correct?
Yes, well, the poetry that my parents read to me was of course in Spanish, so that the poets that I learned as a child was Amado Nervo, Rosario Castellanos, Juan Iturbide, the classical poets. My mother, before she was married, put together an anthology of poetry that she typed very carefully. There's not a single typo on the 250 pages of the anthology. And this was before whiteout. So she's been a very good typist, and I don't know how many drafts she went through to get it in such a perfect condition. Yeah.
That's wonderful, because poetry is, I find that it's been said, I think that the poet is the conscience of society, something like that. And So to infuse us with that, it's very inspiring. We used to learn poetry in school. I remember The Raven in particular. But I would love to have had more exposure to poetry in Spanish. I think that would have been very exciting. And in rereading my book, It's All of the Frijoles, I have wonderful poetry in there. And I revel in it when I read it and listen to it and hear it again, and wish we could just have recordings of it playing everywhere to inspire us. But, going back to your early days, so you were going to become a doctor, then you went into philosophy and literature, and you started writing poetry. What sparked that? You yourself writing the poetry?
Okay, well, let's clarify something. I was writing poetry when I was 3 or 4 years old.
My goodness.
Those children are. So I didn't start my poetry then. Certainly when I graduated from college, my ambition was to become a doctor. And of course, my parents did not have the money to send me to college. So after high school, I joined the U.S. Navy in order to get the GI Bill. And in the Navy, I was in the hospital corps. So I worked in hospitals and in the field. The first 2 years were at Corona Naval Hospital in Southern California. And then for my sea duty, I was transferred to the Marine Corps and spent those second 2 years in Hawaii as a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps, in the Medical Corps. So when I got out of the Navy, I enrolled at the University of Texas at Paso. At that time, it was Texas Western College of the University of Texas, and did all my work in pre-med with a double major in Spanish and English literature, and took some time off before I graduated to study at the Universidad Autónoma de Mexico, where I studied Mexican archaeology, history of Mexican art, Mexican philosophy, Mexican literature. And when I graduated from UTEP, Texas Western College, in applying for 2 medical schools, I went through a crisis there. Do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And I decided that my heart was really into literature, the liberal arts. So I told my professors this, and Dr. Ray Pass, one of my professors in English, said, "Well, I'll nominate you for a Woodrow Wilson fellowship." So I did. I made it to the finals of this scholarship, and went to Austin for the formal interview by the committee, Woodrow Wilson Committee, and that's something interesting because it was a whole trajectory of thing. When I was out there filling the papers to be reimbursed for my travels to Austin, the chairman of the Woodrow Wilson Committee came to me, Dean Hubbard, I remember his name, from the University of Tulane, and told me and said, "Have you thought of applying for a National Education Act fellowship?" And I said, "No, I hadn't even heard of it." And he said, "Well, it's a 3-year fellowship, and the Woodrow Wilson is only one. So why don't you apply to the University of Oregon?" He said, "It has an up-and-coming English department there, headed by Dr. Kester Svensson, who is an authority on Milton. I thought, okay, I will. Meanwhile, I had been accepted to the University of California, Berkeley's graduate school in English, where I intended to apply the Woodrow Wilson fellowship, and I got it. And well, in February, I got a telegram from the University of Oregon. Will you accept an EA fellowship? And answer immediately. And I really wanted to go to Berkeley.
Well, that's a great school, and it's interesting that you've ended up back in Berkeley, and you were named the professor, poet emeritus of Berkeley. I mean, that's quite an honor. So you shifted into literature and poetry. You went to Berkeley in those early days, and did you begin writing poetry? You were writing it before, but you became a professor of literature and poetry, and you taught at various universities, 3 universities, I think it is, and you've been awarded acknowledgement for your peace and social justice work, your poetry, your activism. All aspects of your life have been honored and awarded. You're being a peace activist and social justice activist. I found it interesting when I said, how would I describe you, a peace activist? And you said peace and social justice. He says, what you said, without justice, there is no peace. Talk about the conflagration, the interfacing of poetry and peacemaking, of peace and justice.
Okay. Well, many of the poems that I was introduced at the beginning of my life, you might say, always had themes in them of justice. And my parents are very conscious of that. So I learned my values of justice and of activism from my parents. I must say that my first act of civil disobedience was when I was in high school. In high school, in my junior year, I was elected president of the student council of my high school. And it happened to be the year that my school, Paso High School, was the host school for the Southern Association of Student Councils. And one day, the sponsor, faculty sponsor of the student council, came to me with a bunch of letters and saying, as president of the host student council, you have to sign these. And they were letters to high schools in the South that were Black. You have to realize that I grew up in a totally segregated times area. And they were letters saying to the schools, sorry, you cannot attend the conference because you're Black, essentially. And I refused to sign those letters. No, my name does not go on those letters. Miss Box then took me to the office of the principal, and they were very kind. And I said, well, we agree with you totally on this, but the bylaws of the Southern Association of Student Councils thing. And I just wouldn't budge. And I said, no, I will not sign those letters. So they had the secretary of the association sign the letters instead. So that I think from a very early age, I have been involved in activism, in justice. And when one writes, one thing that I was very conscious of very early was that one has an obligation to raise one's voice against what one thinks is injustice and is unfairness. And as one gains more and more, the craft of writing and gaining one's voice, one feels the obligation, the responsibility to speak for the voiceless. And I've always been conscious of that. Certainly poetry itself is by its very nature a celebration. But in that celebration, one must always also raise one voice to that which is not to be celebrated. The one that impinges upon beauty, impinges upon truth, impinges upon justice. So I try, I do both. I write poetry of pure celebration of the awe one feels before creation, and certainly also many of them are poems of protest, and usually they merge. It's not either one or the other, they're interwoven.
Well, you have a beautiful way of interweaving the ancient and the contemporary, the symbolism of ancient precious stones, for example, in some of the poetry that I've seen, that when you're celebrating birthdays and the different astrological signs. But you, like many others, blend the ancient and the contemporary. And there is much to be learned from the ancient that we seem to be dropping out of awareness in the modern day, thinking that there's only one way of looking things, and it's post-Descartes, rather than looking at the magic and the mysticism, the beauty, the wholeness, the wonder, the awe, all of those things that you're talking about, that should be part of our celebration of life, and praising the fact that we are alive and here to do good in the world. It's been told by all the great teachers and prophets of the world, do good, be good, love the creator, whatever you choose to call it. So it's, I love the way you do that, and you do it so beautifully.
Thank you, Yolanda.
Again, though, the connection between the activism and the poetry seems to be a thread in poetry. But I remember at President Obama's, was it President Obama's? The young woman who read a poem, was that Obama, or that might have been, no, it had to have been Obama. Maybe it was Biden's, I can't remember. Time is starting to, what happened when? I'm trying to go back, and I think I'm going to write a short story book, because there are moments in history that I think back on. You, and thinking back on those moments, you became involved in the movement to disarm, also, engaging in a protest at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories when you were young. And yes, talk about that.
Okay. In 1982, I took a leave of absence from my teaching position at Laney College to help organize the first international of nuclear disarmament. And I spent that year helping organize the first international of nuclear disarmament, and was arrested several times during that time for blockading institutions that were involved in the arms race, kind of thing. So yeah, I'm still involved in it. In the movement, mostly through my writing now, since the COVID thing. So yeah.
Well, that's an ongoing issue. You know, we during the 60s, I remember those times of, you know, peaceful protests and actions. And we were even going back further than that. You know, Eisenhower warned of the beware of the military industrial complex. And notice he's probably one of the most ignored presidents in history, probably because he said that. But the issues are still there. And so in this world, and today we're in a very difficult and challenging position. We have what, 100, over 100 violent conflicts ongoing across the globe. We have the war in Ukraine, certainly. We have other wars that are officially declared wars, but you know, over 100 armed conflicts, that's a bit much, is it not? So with those
Yes.
issues pending, what activities are you encouraging people to engage in to peacefully seek change?
Civil disobedience and going out into the streets and writing our representatives and raising ruckus. That we have to do, kind of thing. I have two poems I'd like to share with you, especially this on this topic. One of them I wrote while I was held at the Longpark Federal Prison for blockading the test of the MX missile, which was the first strike weapon of the Reagan administration. And there were 500 or so of us that were arrested at the Vandenberg Air Force Base. And well, while I was held in jail, I wrote these words: "Here for life, Vandenberg Air Force Base, January 1983, first blockade of MX missile testing. I am here. I wear the old one's jade. It's light, they said, and precious. Turquoise have sought to hone my visions, and coral to cultivate the heart, mother of pearl for purity. I have put on what power I could to tell you there are mountains where the stones sleep, hawks nest there, and lichens older than the ice is cold. The sea is vast and deep, keeping secrets darker than the rocks are hard. I am here to tell you, the earth is made of things, so much themselves they make the angels kneel. We walk among them, and they are certain as the rain is wet, and they are fragile as the pine is tall. We too belong to them. They count upon our singing, the footfalls of our dance, our children's shouts, their laughter. I am here for the unfinished song, the uncompleted dance, the healing, the dreadful fakes of love. I am here for life, and I will not go away. And that is a promise that as long as I have voice in it, I will race it against the forces of death and the forces of injustice. We are now on the brink of a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. I say between the U.S. and Russia, but it will be for the whole life, for the whole world. So that's it, that's where I stand. Right. I think our time is going a bit short here. Yeah, so I might say that I read to you the English version of this poem.
Yes.
But all my poems, or 99% of them, are written in both languages. Right.
Well, it's a beautiful way to reach out, and that's a magnificent poem. And again, drawing from the precious stones and the qualities of spirit and heart that we want to live in our lives today. You represent much of what the heart mind that we're now acknowledging as being who we really are, not really the brain, but the heart mind. And that is one of the ideas that I think you capture in your work, and that will keep us going and keep us hopeful, because we could get very depressed about what we're looking at in the world. But you provide hope through the beauty of your poetry, and we live hope when we take action, when we acknowledge the wrong, seek to do something to change it. Yes, like you say, express the voice against death and destruction and falsehood and lies, and seek to embody the hope, the love, the unity that is taught throughout, philosophies, religions, and spiritual practices across the centuries.
Recordarte cómo se siente el sol, el sabor de la sal, el olor del aruel, el chirrido de grillo en noche de verano, el arco iris después de lluvia, lo que es amar. Imploraré a tu goce o a tu pavor. Puede ser terrible la tierra, en sus tormentas y en sus temblores, pero es la medida de cuál paraíso imaginemos jamás. Tú y yo moriremos demasiado pronto, pero que no siga la vida es más allá de aceptable. ¿Qué puedo decir para que ames la vida? Suficiente para que actúes y alcances la voz en su defensa. What can I say to entice you to defend the earth? Remind you how the sun feels, the taste of salt, the smell of bay, a cricket chirp on a summer night, the rainbow after rain, what it is to love? Shall I appeal to your joy or to your fear? Earth can be terrible in her storms and in her quakes, but she is the measure of any paradise we will ever imagine. You and I will die all too soon, but the life will not go on is beyond accepting. What can I say to make you love life enough to act and raise your voice in her defense? And that's called The Call.
It's magnificent, as is, all of the poetry I've ever heard you, deliver or read. And it's a call to action, a call to inspiration, and it's something each and every one of us can do. Thank you so much for joining us today on Do You See What I See? Rafael J. González. Muchísimas gracias. And do tune in next month. I have another wonderful guest. It's author and activist, we love those activists, author and activist Denise Chavez, and she'll be coming to us next month in September as our guest. Thank you so much for joining me on Do You See What I See? I'm Yolanda Nava. Thank you.